Do you regret the fact that you have shot the scene like you did?
No, but I feel guilty.
Paris, 1972. Maria Schneider is just 19, new to fame. Marlon Brando is 48, already a legend. The cameras roll on a scene everyone thinks they understand, except the young woman at the center of it. A last-minute change, not in the script. A closed set, real tears. If you were reading the papers back then, you remember the headlines. Bans, walkouts, glowing reviews, all arguing about art. But almost no one asked the simplest question. What happened to Maria that day?
Schneider avec le dernier tango à Paris.
Non, je l'aurais pas fait, moi.
Tonight, we examine this from her perspective. Not the myth, not the director's swagger. The truth, as a young actress experienced it. Confused, cornered, and then left to carry the weight for decades, while the men were applauded. Were you around when Last Tango in Paris hit theaters? Do you remember your first reaction to the controversy? Tell me in the comments, because what you're about to hear may change how you remember that era. Stay with me. We're starting at the beginning, how Maria landed the role, the power dynamics in the room, and the warning signs everyone missed. The casting and the machine. Paris, late 1971. A cramped office, gray light. Maria Schneider walks in wearing borrowed confidence. She's 19, talented, and, like many of you were at that age, eager to prove she belongs. Across from her sits Bernardo Bertolucci, charming, intense, the kind of man who says, "Trust me," and makes it sound like an opportunity. Pages change, directions shift. "We'll discover it together," he says. That sounds poetic, until you realize it also means there are no professional safeguards. Enter Marlon Brando, 48, myth already in the room before he is. He doesn't audition, he occupies space. He's brilliant, no question.
Il trouvait the glory insane, que la gloire c'était malsain.
But the power dynamic is clear. Director as authority, star as co-conspirator, new actress as the one expected to adapt. If you remember how sets worked back then, you know the professional protocols were minimal. Men with power found the truth, and everyone else kept up. From the start, Maria is told she's perfect because you're authentic. Translation: we want you unguarded. Improvisation becomes a philosophy. Don't plan, just feel. Scenes are alive, which really means unstructured. The script is more suggestion than contract. When Maria asks practical questions, how far does this go? What exactly is expected? The answers are vague. We'll see on the day. If you've ever worked for a boss who kept the plan in his pocket, you can feel the uncertainty forming. Publicity heats up before the cameras do. Whispers of an adult art film swirl through Paris cafes. You might remember the era. Critics hungry for shock, censors sharpening knives, movie houses daring audiences to be modern. That atmosphere becomes another character, one that rewards pushing boundaries and punishes hesitation. On set, the hierarchy is invisible but felt. Closed-door chats between director and Brando. Crew members who nod at things they don't fully understand. Maria learns quickly. If she wants to be professional, she accepts confusion and keeps pace. She's praised when she's adaptable, questioned when she asks for clarity. A young woman trying not to disappoint industry legends. Some of you will remember the pressure of not wanting to be difficult. Early warning signs appear. We'll shoot it spontaneously. So, no rehearsal to prepare her. It'll be more authentic if you don't know. So her uncertainty becomes a tool. Trust the process. So consent is assumed, not confirmed. To the outside world, it's glamorous. Brando in Paris, an audacious director, a bold new actress. Inside, a quieter story is forming of a teenager being conditioned to accept surprises as art and silence as professionalism. Hold that picture, because the morning that matters, the day an element is added without warning, only makes sense when you see how the ground was prepared first.
Donc, mais j'aurais fait ce métier de toute façon, mais d'une manière peut-être plus graduelle, pas être très connue sur un film.
The morning professional boundaries were crossed. It's the day. A closed set, the phrase that's supposed to mean safety. Maria Schneider arrives early, quiet, professional. She's 19. You remember that age, trying to look brave so the adults will take you seriously. Planning happens without her. Bernardo Bertolucci and Marlon Brando share an idea. Last minute, not on the page. When Maria steps onto the floor, she hears it minutes before cameras roll. We're changing an element, not a discussion. A notice. No rehearsal, no time to process, no chance to say what any of us would want our daughter, or our younger self, to be able to say no. The room tightens, lights up, someone calls for reduced crew, a set piece positioned. An unexpected element is added to the scene. The new addition is framed as more authentic. To whom? For what? Maria nods, because that's how you keep your job when the industry veterans are watching. She's not consenting. She's complying. There's a difference, and many of you learned it the hard way, long before anyone used the word consent, action. What you see in the movie follows the script. What you hear, her breath catching, her voice breaking, reveals something else. Maria's tears aren't from character. They're from shock, humiliation, and the knowledge that two powerful men made a decision and excluded her from it. She does what every young worker in a room full of authority figures has done at least once. She gets through it. Cut. No check-in. No, "Are you okay?" Crew members look down, busying their hands. The director is already speaking with the star about what to keep, what to lose. Maria finds a corner. Stairwell, doorway, anywhere away from eyes, and tries to breathe. Someone offers a tissue, the smallest kindness in a moment that never should have needed one. Later, one of the men will say, "It's just a movie," but you and I know that's what people say when they don't have to carry the memory. And here's the part industry history skipped at the time. There was one take, because the authenticity they wanted, her genuine distress, had been captured. They called that art. For Maria, it was a wound she'd spend years trying to close. Hold on to that image of a teenager walking off a set, fundamentally changed. Next, the world explodes. Bans, courtroom seizures, rave reviews, and still almost no one asks what happened to the young woman at the center of it. The world applauds, she pays. The movie opens. You might remember it. Lines around the block, headlines arguing about art and obscenity. Some countries seize prints. Critics call it daring. The rating boards debate and then cash the tickets. Everyone discusses the film. Almost no one asks about the actress. For Maria Schneider, 19, the applause sounds like a door slamming behind her. Reporters want the character, not the person. She's photographed, prodded, treated like she must be wild, because that's what audiences saw in the story. If you remember the 1970s press, you know how it went. The men were brave. The young woman was provocative. She's praised for being raw, which is cruelly accurate because she was left unprotected. The work keeps coming, but the environment feels unsafe. Maria makes a decision that tells you everything. No more vulnerable scenes. Not for money, not for prestige, not for anyone's idea of truth. She walks off sets when professional boundaries shift. People whisper, difficult. Some of you lived this, say no in a man's industry back then, and the label sticks. She narrows her choices to roles and directors who treat her as an actor, not a sensation. A few do, many don't. The public story paints her as troubled. The private story is simpler. Hurt people. Try to numb hurt. The spiral, anxiety, bad nights, worse headlines, feeds itself. Friends see flashes of the warm, wry person she was before the posters and their price. She clings to small, safe routines, a few loyal allies, and the rare set where the word no is heard as a complete sentence. Meanwhile, the men move on. Awards talk, retrospectives, new projects. They can argue theory at festivals. Maria is left carrying memory, the kind you can't file under cinema studies. She keeps working, but on her terms. If you were a parent then, or you are one now, you understand this instinct. Control what you can after you weren't given a choice. And here's the bitter twist of that era. The controversy that made the film famous obscured the reason it should have been questioned. The world fought over whether audiences should see it. Few asked how it was made. We're not done. Years pass. Maria finds steadier ground and finally, her voice. And when the director's own words resurface decades later, the industry has to listen. If you were there for the opening weekend, tell me, does the debate feel different to you now? Stay with me. Next, Maria speaks for herself, and the industry has to listen. Maria speaks, and the recording that changed everything. Time passes, the posters fade, but the memory doesn't. Maria Schneider learns to choose her ground. No more vulnerable scenes, no more surprises, fewer chances, but safer ones. She keeps working when the set feels respectful. She steps away when it doesn't. That's not difficult, that's survival. Years later, seated for an interview, Maria finally puts careful words to what happened. Calm voice, steady eyes. She explains that the most humiliating element was not in the script. She learned it minutes before the camera rolled. What we saw was performed. What she felt was not. Her tears were real. Her shock was real. And here's the line that lands like a stone. She did not know. She was allowed to say no. If you remember how that era worked professionally, you know how true and how common that was. For a while, her truth drifts past the headlines. Then, in the 2010s, something shifts. A recording surfaces of the director describing that day in his own words. He admits he withheld the element from Maria to get a more genuine reaction. He wanted the person, not the actress. Imagine hearing that as a parent or grandparent. Many of you did. The world listens again, properly this time, and you can feel the mood turn. Actors, directors, audiences, outrage, disbelief, a hard reevaluation of a classic. Let's be clear for anyone joining late. The scene followed safety protocols for what was filmed. The harm was real off camera. The ambush, the humiliation, the power used as a tool. Maria had said this for years. Only now does the culture finally hear her. Some of you wrote to newspapers back in the day. Today, you'd write a comment or a tweet. Different technology, same conscience. And what about Marlon Brando? Public apologies never came. In private, he kept a distance from the director in later years. Complicated feelings all around. Maria would say she carried anger toward the director for life. Her relationship with Brando stayed complicated. Respect, hurt, a bond formed in a situation she never chose. Out of this comes something useful. New language, new jobs, new rules. Studios start bringing in people whose only task is to protect consent in challenging scenes. Young actors are told where the boundaries are before the day, not after the cut. If you worked in any industry that finally wrote down the protocols after a problematic era, you'll recognize that feeling. About time. Before we move on, were you aware of Maria's interviews back then, or did this only hit your radar when the director's comments resurfaced? Tell me below. Your memories of the 1970s matter here. Next, we'll close Maria's journey. How she built a steadier life, what changed across the industry, and how this film should be taught now, not as a legend, but as a lesson. Legacy, Maria's lasting voice and outro. In the years that follow, Maria Schneider rebuilds her professional life. Not perfectly, not neatly, but honestly. She chooses smaller parts with respectful people. She says no more often. She laughs again. She builds a private world with those who see her as a person, not a poster. The anger at Bernardo Bertolucci never cools. How could it? But she finds a kind of peace in telling the truth, plainly, whenever she's asked. The culture finally catches up. Studios begin hiring people whose only job is to protect actors during challenging scenes. Clear conversations happen before the day, not whispered during the take. Young performers are told what we wish Maria had been told at 19. You can stop. You can ask. You can refuse. And for those of you who remember how casual the old ways were, you know how overdue that shift was. The film itself, it doesn't vanish, but it changes shape. What once played as brave now screens as a case study. Professors pause the reel to ask the question the 1970s never did. How did they achieve that moment, and at what cost? Viewers who lined up back then, some of you watching now, revisit it with new understanding. Admiration for craft doesn't cancel out compassion for the person who was hurt. We can hold both truths. We must. And Marlon Brando? History will always list him among the greats. But for this story, that greatness sits beside a teenager's tears. That's part of the record now. It should be. So, where does Maria's story land? With a voice that wasn't heard in her youth, finally echoing where it matters. In classrooms, on sets, in the quiet decisions that keep another 19-year-old from being cornered and told to just feel. If that's the legacy, it belongs to Maria. If you lived through 1972, did this change how you see Last Tango in Paris? Should it still be celebrated or taught as an ethics lesson? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in protecting young performers, tap like, subscribe, and share this with someone who remembers those headlines. Your perspective matters here.